Welcome. If you are seeking information on parent-child hierarchies in Power BI, you are at the right spot. This is going to be a fully expanded tutorial that's going to cover every concept of parent-child hierarchies. What we're going to talk through today are the following things. First, if you have a data structure like this, where you have a simple child and a parent known commonly across hierarchies or product rollups or many different types of things, this is the video you're going to want. What we're going to do is we're going to go through these varying steps. First, I'm going to show you how to flatten this information out. Second, we'll create a hierarchy off of it that will roll information up. Third, there's complexities that happen where blanks show up in varying things. I'm going to show you how to remove those and take those out. Fourth, we're going to go through multiple slicer options for how you can use, after you create a hierarchy, different slicer options. Five, a key thing with hierarchy, obtaining that information, is being able to roll it into a row level security. I'm going to show you how to unlock row level security with a parent-child hierarchy. So as somebody comes into your data set, it confirms that they can only see what they're permitted to see based upon the hierarchy. We're going to talk through every single path function, so you'll have a full understanding of how to use that. And then finally, we'll review some marketplace visuals. At the end of this video, you will have a full understanding for how to use parent-child hierarchies as well as all the different path functions. Please take a minute, hit subscribe, follow this channel. More Power BI content will always be coming to you. Thank you very much. Let's dive into Power BI Desktop. Let's go. All right, so here we are. You're going to have two options. You can watch this video and follow along, but I highly suggest you go to the link in the description of this video and download the GitHub file called PBI this date parent-child hierarchy. Why? Because we're going to follow along, and if you want to unlock this stuff, we're going to go through step by step. You can literally follow along. So take a minute, go download it, come back to this video. Okay, now you're back. Let's talk about what's in here in our game plan. Like I said, we're going to cover every aspect of parent-child hierarchies. It's going to be a fully expanded tutorial. You will learn everything you need to know. On the right-hand side, I've preemptively set this up for lab parent-child dataset. This is what we're going to build off of. To just start by looking at what that table is, as many of you might have something like this, where you have a child ID, a parent ID. This is all just fake information, by the way. So it's just made up names, randomly generated kind of stuff. So you can then use it as you would any kind of normal hierarchy based upon your own data. It's going to have the name of the person and their email. So if you understand how a child-parent hierarchy works, what it does is essentially says this ID reports to this parent, and then somewhere in this list, this ID, 64065, is in here, and it reports to another parent, and it kind of builds up a hierarchy, like an organizational structure. We're going to be unlocking this thing very simplistically, eventually getting to something that looks like this, where we're going to have it all blown out with paths and how to look at every single thing. We'll create row level security off of it. We're going to have the whole deal, but we're going to go through it step by step. So that's why you can follow along. There's a secondary table just for some additional calculations we can go through that has sales per year. It's just fake data, again, generated randomly from Excel. But if we look at it on the sales per year, you'll see it just shows an employee ID and a randomly generated sales amount. It's going to be helpful for showing a measure, how we can roll things up in a little bit. Now, that's the overview of the file. Let's start with the first process. We're going to flatten this thing out. So again, excuse me, what we'll do is follow along, and each tab will build something below it. So what we're going to want to do is get to the point where we flatten this thing out. But let's start looking at it so we can understand kind of how it works. Okay. And what we'll also do is we're going to be creating multiple columns, multiple things. We'll organize them within this section here. So we're going to start kind of with the hierarchy attributes, but we're going to really be in the table view initially. So let's understand what we're looking at here. The lab parent-child dataset, if you click this, so the top of every parent or every structure is going to be somebody who doesn't have a parent, and that's like, you know, the big boss person at the top. So in this case, it's this random person, but it's ID 70945. So you'll always want to make sure you have one of those. That's the critical thing for how this unwinds. So let's look at the first function, and we're going to add it into here. The first thing we need to do is Power BI has a set of intuitive, smart functions to really deconstruct any kind of hierarchy for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to New Column, and we're going to define the path. So in this case, we're going to call it path, and this equals, if you look at the function path, and we're going to go through everything, it pretty much asks for first the child name and then the parent name. So very simplistically, we're going to go to lab parent child, put the child ID, and then we're going to go to get the parent ID from the lab data set that we have here. And hit enter. Cool. So now what does this do? Understanding this path function is very important. And I'll add one more function to help explain it. So what this is doing is it's essentially showing how far this thing goes. So this child, 86930 right here, rolls up to this person, who rolls up to this person, who rolls up to this person. You can see this 70945 is at the top. So the path puts people into places. A way to understand that a little bit more easily is if we had another column, and if we type in path, you'll see something called a path length. This is going to show the depth of the path, and it uses the path function. So what the depth is what we want to do is with path length, put in the new path column you just created, and we'll call this path length. And let's sort it. Sort ascending. So this kind of helps explain what we're looking at. The path length is going to say how deep in the hierarchy is this person. So this person right here, the parent, ultimate parent 70945, they're at the very top. Then it looks like the parent has about 7 or so people who report, and they have their path, and it keeps going and expanding all the way downward. What we can see is this particular set of data has a total path length of 8. It goes 8 levels deep. So we have now successfully identified the depth of the hierarchy, as well as, obtained the path. So the next thing we're going to want to do is, if we look at some of these attributes, is we're going to want to flatten it out. So here's a process for how to flatten it out. What I'm going to do is ultimately, we're going to create one measure that's going to bring back the name, but I'm going to teach you by showing you individual columns first. So what do I mean by that? We're going to create these test columns. So what those look like is we want to first, if we come back up to our table, it's also important while you're setting up your model for your own data, if you notice your IDs are aggregating, you don't want to sum those together. Just turn off summarization. There's no reason for those to ever summarize. They're just IDs. Okay, so now we're going to abstract, pull out the ID based upon a certain level. And that's going to be the key way to start flattening things. So we're going to go to New Column. We're going to look at another path function. It's called PATHITEM. So what this is asking for is the path. So we're going to put the path in that we created for lab. Now the position. So the position means this is position 1, position 2, 3, 4. It keeps adding up, all the way down to position 8 way here at the very bottom of this thing. So we're going to say, because we're going to create a column that pulls back the different paths, but I want to show you the components of it. We're going to say get this path 1, and it's a type of integer. If you have a text, you can use, it's a text ID. If it's an integer, it's an integer column. But this is going to be test path ID item. So 70945. Again, if we change this to say get the second, just for experimentation, now you can see it's getting the second, which is this person, 84. It's pulling out of the spot the second path. So what we need to do is, this is the concept of using variables to look things up. Because ultimately, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to get who this person is. So let's create another test column to kind of explain that. and we'll do a lookup. And we'll call this test name retrieval. Test name pull. I'm not sure how to spell retrieval offhand. That's classic. Lookup value. So what this is going to do, if you're ever curious about a function, you can say what it's going to do by looking at it here. So the first thing, it's going to get the result. We want to get the name. So in this case, that's going to be the child full name. We want to get the person's name whoever this is. So to get that, we're going to search a column, and we want to search the child ID, because that's going to be the unique ID for every person. Child ID. And in this case, we're going to search this test path item. So we pulled this ID 86219. We can see this is the second person. In this case, we know that this is this person right here, but let's return that name in the column. And there you go. So now it's returning the name of the person appropriately in the column. So if we would say filter this, maybe just pick this person, we can see all these people report to level 2 here. But the key thing is I want to show you how these columns link up with each other. How it goes test path ID to then get the name. Because what we're going to do is we're not going to use those. Those are referential. So in this case, we're just going to leave them there because they're kind of test, and we will clear them out. To keep that clear, I'll kind of rename them like test. And I'm just going to rename this one test 2. So those are kind of there because we're going to create a more clean measure. And what that looks like is something like this. And we'll talk through it and we'll create it. So what you can do is now we're going to come back to this table. We're going to go I didn't want to do a new table. I'm going to do new column. And this is going to contain everything we just spoke about. So level 1, what we want to do first, I'm going to talk through this, and you can type it up. You can do the exact same thing. You can copy from the file. But it's a pretty straightforward process that just does everything we spoke about. So it gets a first variable where it gets what's called a path value. And what we're doing is the same thing where we go for the path, and we just want to get the child parent path. So it's literally going through and pulling the path itself. It's creating the path in the column. If we don't want to use that, we could just simply put path as well. There's different ways you can do it. And now from the path, we want to get level 1. And we just looked at the path item function. So it's saying, go to this path, get level 1, which is going to be the first thing, return that as path level, and now we need to translate that for path item. We're going to now say get the value or the path value, which is right here, from the path level, return it as an integer. So we put these columns in. These are just the two things. Again, the value is the path, the level is the depth of the hierarchy, and then the integer is just the type. You might have a text, and then we do the same lookup to say you get that number. So in this case, we're at 84134, kind of in this section. We're going to look up the name, creating the same lookup name that we just did, and then we're going to return it. It's as simple as that. So what that looks like is we hit enter. This is, again, what this is doing to get foo-foo-b. It's saying, first, go to the path, which is this column we created. Second, we want to get level 1. Third, we want to get the path item for the level we put in this variable. So it's going to put the path level 1 right here and return this person, but it returns the ID, 70945. Then we're going to look up that value against the data set, 70945, look it up to get the name of the person, and return the result. That's what you do. So now we have this, we're going to go to column creation town. And what that means is you paste this sucker in here, 2, 2, and we're just changing it. Now we're walking all the way down the hierarchy. And we're going to do this. It'll take a couple of seconds, but you're just going to knock it out. You're going to understand more as you build this out. You see it keeps adding people every time. And As we do this, we're going to go to all the way to level 8 because that's when we saw the hierarchy stopped. So here we are, level 5. And now we're going to go level 6. Change this to level 6. And now we're going to do another column. This is the leveling process. We're almost done. Level 7. And now one more column. Level 8. Now look at that. We just built a hierarchy, and as we have the path length here, let's go ahead and remove this filter just so you can get the full context. So 1, you can see it kind of grow over time. It's getting every person, it's linking it up. I scrolled too fast, but it's going all the way down the hierarchy and filling in every spot. And we have successfully now just flattened this hierarchy. But that's just that's the core first step. So then if we come back to this table as an example, what you should be able to do is, now that we have these levels, let's put them in a folder. It's good to just keep organizing things. So in this case, we're going to want them in a folder called hierarchy attributes. So let's go back to the model view. We're going to pick all these, display folder, hierarchy attributes, just to keep things organized. We're going to minimize that. We'll put this in there as well. So now we have our hierarchy attributes. We're going to put this in there too. And look at that. So now we have it flattened. But how do we use the flattening? So let's talk about creating our first simple calculation. Like, how many people are in your organization? That's going to be a key thing that you're going to want to do. So what we can do is a very simple calculation where we're going to do a distinct count of every child ID. So again, in the data set, there's every child is a person. So that's what we're going to count up. We're going to do a new calculation. There's different ways to get the same result. We're calling it head count. I just by default always like to do distinct count, no blank. You can do count. In this case of the data, it's all the same. But this will just be this is my kind of go-to. Oops, so it's already created. So we're going to go head count lab. So now down here, we're going to create a table. And let's put this in a calculation folder. So we'll come here. I like to go display folder, star, CALC, just so it's at the top. And let's see how many people there are. So in this case, we're going to go CALC, lab tab, 1269. Well, let's just make that measure real quick, have a comma. And now let's confirm that it's working as you expect. So what that looks like is with our new hierarchy attributes, the levels, let's add level 1. We'll turn it into a table so we can just see everything more easily. So again, the top person, and then his directs, and then it kind of works its way down, walking all the way down, all the way to level 8. And we have our setup. And then also what we do have, we can move this at the bottom, is we can show for reference the path. So this helps you understand now the path of how we walked all the way down. Here's their IDs, as well as then the path length. So you can see the depth. And these are the core attributes for you having now successfully flattened the hierarchy. That is flattened. Now, the next key step is after we flatten a hierarchy, well, how do we get it to look like something like this? So here's the same deal. I'll zoom in a little bit more. And it shows the organizational structure. It's going to show each person based upon the level. You can click plus, and it kind of counts up the people under them, and it builds the hierarchy out. You can then use this as filters and reporting and everything else. So we're going to do that right now. And what we're going to actually do to this is just kind of show too, if we come back to our calculations, there's going to be a couple of columns we're going to create. But in the case of sales, maybe you have sales amounts too, or whatever, you can kind of add those in. Again, from our model, I'll go through these calculations right now. We're going to build this table. Okay, so what do you do? Well, the first thing you're going to see is that we need to aggregate these things up into a hierarchy, or not aggregate them, but structure them. So to do that, go to the level on the right-hand side we created, the first top level, and just go create hierarchy. It's going to make a hierarchy. We'll call it hierarchy. And you can see under the hierarchy, there's just level 1. So now let's just go through all these and add it to the hierarchy. Add level 2, add to hierarchy, add level 3, add to hierarchy level 4, add to hierarchy level 5, add to hierarchy level 6. Again, if you're following along, you're building this thing out, you're going to master how to do this. You do it once with this data set, then you can do it with any other data set. Hierarchy, add to hierarchy level 8. And now we've created a hierarchy. So let's add it in here. That's how easy that is, creating a hierarchy after you flatten it. If we just click the hierarchy, okay, so it shows, it returns everything that you'd expect in the kind of way. But what we want to do is change this to a matrix. As we change it to a matrix, you can see it will expand. Oh, but now here's where we're going to get into some calculation stuff. And this is a tricky part about removing blanks and how to work with this. So what you'll see is that under every person, if we add back in that head count lab calculation that we did, where it counted every child. So the total is correct, 1269, but it's going to start counting people kind of incorrectly here. And what, oh, this is counting. We got to do from the lab. Sorry. Parent child, oh, we want to do lab, child ID. Okay. So, but what you're going to start to see is that these blanks show up, and you need to understand why this is happening. And I'll show you how to work through them with measures. So what's happening is, like, if this is the first level, well, you can keep clicking down. It's going to keep showing blanks, 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 because this is the record for this actual person. It's not double counting it. It's not adding up a 1 every time, but the logic of the hierarchy is actually going through. If you look at your table, and here's the first top person, well, it's saying, okay, for level 2, they're blank. Level 3, they're blank. All the way through your hierarchy is blank. So it's actually showing it correctly as blank, but we need to not have those counted. We don't want to have those present. So how do we do that? We're going to create a few new measures. This will be an important concept to understand. We're going to talk about ISINSCOPE, and we're going to talk about also max path depth. So let's just hang out here for a second. And what we're going to do is, if we first think about how deep is every row, then what we're going to look at for that calculation is the depth of the path. If I even copy this, and we'll go over here and type it for calcs, new measure. So in this case, we'll call it depth path lab. And what this is doing is, if you remember that path length that was like 1 through 8, well, we're just going to simply get the max path length so we can see how deep is this actual path. If we add this here, turn it back into a matrix, we'll collapse into all. Oops, I put the wrong one. We have to go. We want to, again, change this to the lab path, because there's just multiple data sets in here. So if we go lab, come down to the path, put this in there. I went with the depth though. Math. Path length. That's what I called it. Okay. So let's look at this again. As we expand this, there's still blank, so we know it, but it's showing the path depth. So it's saying for this record right here, it's only 1 deep. For this one, it's 2 deep. For this one, it's 2 deep because it stops. The path stops. It doesn't go further, and that's why all these blanks are here. So we need to just know, and if you're not quite sure, keep following along and we'll click eventually. The first thing we need to do is get the depth of everything. But then secondly, there's this in-scope function concept. This one is just important to understand, then we'll add them together and show you how to do it. So let's talk about ISINSCOPE. We're going to make a new calculation here and just test it out. And I'll talk through what it's doing. So the first thing you want to do, or the next thing, is put ISINSCOPE, And what this does is it just says if it's at a certain level in the hierarchy. So because we're using level, like level 2, for example, these things make up the level. So I'll go ISINSCOPE, O2, lab. Let's add this. Okay, so what is this saying? ISINSCOPE means, is it under this value or not? So for example, I said ISINSCOPE 2. Well, it can tell that this is the second level. And as it's the second level, what's being shown is in scope. Everything under this is true. There's all these blanks, but it's all under it. But you can see the first person is not under it. So let's add another one just so you can kind of understand this as well, because we're going to do some calculations with it. I'm showing you more detail than you need. But if we copy this thing, new measure, let's do 3. So we'll help click. Come over here, change it to 3. And now let's add this calculation too. So now everything that was true here is now false because these are above level 3, is in scope. It's not in scope. It's not under this hierarchy. And here's why this is important. Because essentially what we can do is we can create a calculation that says if the way that we're reporting it, by this number being greater, like the depth, you can see it keeps going, keeps expanding for the is in scope as you add more of them. If it grows beyond the depth in the row, then we don't need to show it. So let's look at what that means. Here's the key thing. Let's use this calculation. This will be how you'll do any measure that you're going to put against the hierarchy. So we're going to call it head count hierarchy lab. So we already calculated the head count, right? We're going to call this head count lab, and it adds up everything. But now we want to say, for showing it, if the depth hierarchy, which is going to be the hierarchy of, I have to create one more column, I'm sorry. So here's the next key thing. So we have those in scopes. We need to add them for every single level. So what that looks like is this. If we've done 2, we're going to create something called the depth of the hierarchy. And the way that we do this is if we go new measure, we're going to go a whole bunch of is in scopes. You need to create one of these for every level of your hierarchy. And what it does is in scope is it essentially, if you add true statements together, it adds it up as a numerical value. So let's just talk through this more. Is in scope 2, do one more, plus, and you can start copying it, is in scope 3. Speed this up a little bit. So we're going to go through all of these for essentially those columns we just added. We're going to, or the example is in scopes. We're going to create all of them here. Oops, I missed some parentheses. And as we've created them all here, looks like I have a problem. We will figure out what this is. Let's just hit enter. Okay, it was just a syntax thing. So what this is doing now, we created 2 here as an example. It's going to build them out for all of them and add them together. We're going to call this the lab hierarchy depth. And let's add this here. And we'll take away these other 2 columns just to keep things kind of clean. So now here's what this is doing. As we could see, it's called the lab hierarchy depth. So because we did those is in scopes, we added 8 of them, it adds it together so we can see, okay, this person is at the depth of 1, this person's at the depth of 2. If I expand it, these people are at the depth of 3. Expand this, these people are at the depth of 4. But now what you start to see as well is that their path only goes a certain depth. So every person has a blank because of the problem I showed you before. So how we account for that is we create a measure that says if this value, if the hierarchy depth is actually deeper than the path depth, then don't show it. because it's an artificially created thing. So the way that that looks is if we go to this calculation again, and I'll talk through it. We'll go here, new measure, head count hierarchy lab. So we know we have the lab head count. And now we want to say if the hierarchy depth, which we just created here, is called lab hierarchy depth. If the lab hierarchy depth is less than the depth path lab, is less than this value, or equal to it, then we'll show it. And so this will be a true statement. It means that there is values in there to show. If not, we just won't. So if we add this sucker in there, we add it to the column. Oops. Come here, add it to this. Now what we can see is if we clean this up just a little bit more, we'll take off these depths because we've already talked to them. We'll take off this hierarchy. Is now we can see, and this is going to be the key thing for your, we'll add the comma, for any measures you want to go against your hierarchy, is that it's correctly not showing the 1 for these blanks because it's saying this is the depth of this is beyond what the actual hierarchy is. So what we can do now is remove the initial base one and show this. And we've done it. Now we've cleaned that hierarchy up so it will count everything as expected. Maybe we want to do the same thing. So as we know, there's a relation here that says for the lab parent child connect to the sales table. We'll just replicate this problem again really quickly, where if we have calculations and say we have the total sales, well, if we add this in there, it's doing the same problem. Because what it does is it shows the value twice. So this person actually had this amount, and it's counting it here and counting it here. So the aggregate, it gets confused because of all the blanks. So all we need to do is do that same process where any calculation you have, again, we can just now take what we created. We created this head count hierarchy. So let's copy it, make a new calculation, paste this in here. We'll call it sales hierarchy lab. So we know we want the value, and again, any measure in your thing, in your model, we're going to have this be sales, total sales. So it's going to say calculate the total sales, which is what we're showing here, but check the path depth and the hierarchy depth and ensure that it's a valid thing to show. Hit enter, put it in there. Now you see it's properly showing the blanks as you'd expect. So you can remove this and remove this value and look at that, voila. Now it is for sure the process and the pattern for how to handle that. All right. You can add measures to your hierarchy. You can show all kinds of new stuff now. Let's keep progressing. The next thing we need to talk about is slicers. So here's an example of an issue. So when we have the slicer on the left, let's just uncheck this so like nothing's checked. Well, you can see it's showing the same blanks. So there's this person and then the blank record for them. It's artificial. This, a blank. Every person will have one blank record under them, though. Just will kind of keep going and keep going and keep going. So there's a couple ways you can handle this. What you don't want to do is like if you click this and we uncheck blank, you can see it actually removes somebody from it. So that's not correct because we need to have those in there. It's just looking at the wrong hierarchy. So what you can do is a couple of different options. The first is if you're going to have a slicer on your page, it's going to show things like this. You can go to the filter section of the visual, filters on this visual, and as it has all these different levels in there, well, you can just go to each of them and check, select all, don't pick the blank, level 3, select all, don't pick the blank. And you can see the numbers don't change, so it works correctly. And then you can kind of create this filter. You lock these in, you hide them so the end users don't see what's going on. And you essentially clean up your hierarchy. So it's a good way to deal with the blanks. You can see it's all cleaned up and it's working. Nothing changes. You can interact with it and you're all set. Another option, and you'll do that all the way down the hierarchy, and you'll click this and lock it in, and now that visual will just be locked in. There are a couple of visuals too that you can use if you don't want to do that process. Though I like it, it's simple enough. It just gives me full control. But if you still want to just see what's out there, you can, in your Power BI, you can always go to Get More Visuals. Go to Get More Visuals, and when you're here, if you type in hierarchy, there's something called a hierarchy slicer, and it's pretty darn popular. So if you click this sucker, you can download it and add it right to your model. No problem there. It's Power BI certified. But what it does is, if we do this right here, we'll pick it, hierarchy slicer. We're going to change, and again, that one was plugged into the other model. So I'll just show you this real quick, because again, we're using multiple models. If you're not sure how to make a filter, we'll just start really quick from the beginning. So in our new lab parent-child data set, we've created the hierarchy. If you simply click the hierarchy and then click the filter, it turns it into a filter. You can then go and change the title and the names and whatever you want to rename stuff as, but these are the blanks, and this is the problem we're going to solve. And that's why I just demoed over here. You can go to each level and hide it. But what you can also do, if you choose to, is get a visual. So if you get this hierarchy slicer, do the exact same thing, add in the hierarchy. Well, it's going to show the same problem, but it just has a nice kind of selection control section that says hide members if they're empty. And it just cleans it up for you automatically. It literally does the same thing we just discussed, or I just showed you with hiding the blanks. It's just an intuitively thing built into it. So if you want that experience, you can check it out. Myself, I like to use the native visuals and just control the filtering out the blanks like I showed. But that's how that will work. Again, we'd want to add the KPI. This is blank because this isn't hooked up to the model. But if we do these ones where we go the headcount hierarchy lab, the sales hierarchy lab, now as we click this, you can see how this is kind of working out, and we're all set. So let's keep progressing. Now the next key thing, and that's how you can deal with the slicers. The next key thing is row level security. All right, now this is where it can get really powerful to have a hierarchy. So there's a function that you need to understand called PATHCONTAINS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring this up real quick, and we'll create it as a test. So let's minimize some of these things so it just looks a little bit bigger. And here we are. So what we have done already is we have created, and I'm going to show you these details because it's going to be how we implement row level security. In your hierarchy, you can add in the hierarchy, and the hierarchy does have hierarchy attributes, the path. So if I add in the path, again, this is this big long number. So the way row level security works is we can do something called PATHCONTAINS. And this is going to be a top level row level security process. But if you do this, you'll be able to secure it, and I'll show you a demo of that. So what we're going to do is for this information, we're going to add in the email of each of these people, and then here's their path. And now there's a new function that we can do called PATHCONTAINS. And what the PATHCONTAINS function does, we'll do this. We'll go PATHCONTAINS. We put the path in there. So it's the lab, the path, the item. Now it's just going to search it. So in this case, we'll search 626665. 62665. Very simplistic. And we'll say test PATHCONTAINS. Okay. Add this in here. And what this just did now is it searches everything to say, does the path actually contain the value that we sent to it? So you can see these ones do, and then it doesn't. So row level security 101. Now let's come over here, and we're going to make, or we actually don't have to make it. We already created it back here in the hierarchy. Let's just copy the same table we created and move it back over here to RLS. And so this will be kind of our test section that says, is row level security working or not? And the way that this will happen is like so. So what we're going to do is in row level security, there's something called the user principal name. And that is, as anybody logs into your file, it's going to say, what's their email address? And it captures that value. Again, all the emails here are just some random fake company email. But what we're going to do is you go to modeling, manage roles. And so you can see I already created one here. And here's the concept of it. So when somebody logs in, the lookup value function is going to say, get their user principal name, and then go and obtain their ID. So if I log in, it will scan and get my ID, and then just simply return if the path contains what we're looking for. So again, to type this out, we'll do a new one. We'll call this lab RLS. We'll go to switch to DAX editor. It just gives more control. And so we're saying, get the ID first, a variable. We're going to look up. We're going to get the lab child ID. And we're going to pull it from the email address, lab email. And the value we're going to send is user principal name into that sucker right there. Return, and then it's going to simply be, does it contain that path contains function we just talked about? Does the path contain? As we're clicking and building this, we can see actually that the table I have selected is incorrectly filtering on the parent-child table from the original example I was creating. We need to put this filtering on the table we created, the lab tab. So we're going to do this. We're going to say, create the ID. We're going to do the lookup for the child ID, the lab parent, the user principal name like we just discussed. And now we're going to return the true statement of path contains, but we're going to take the ID of, we want to get the path. And so now we can see the lab child dataset path, and the item is going to be the underscore ID. So we're searching to say, does the path contain the ID for the person that logged in? Hit save, and it's completed. So now how do we test that? Again, we're going to look down here. And so let's say this person just accessed it. We can do copy value, go to our modeling, go to view as, and so you can test the role. And so we just created this lab row level security, spelled backwards, but that's okay, an other user. So if I click this, I'm going to be viewing it now as this person right here would. As we log in, boom, filtered successfully. It's only showing the people that this person and everyone in their org. So as that happens, you can confirm it's filtering as you'd expect. We can come over here, remove this test path contains. That was just an example. And as you would change the filtering, it will, or change the user principal name. If someone logs in, it will automatically pick them up. And that's how you do the row level security portion of this thing. Let's continue to some visuals. So there is a couple of visuals that were decent, but I want to show these to you just so you can get an idea. Nothing super stand out, but if you do need to show like a hierarchy in an interactive form, I'll stop viewing it like this. I do suggest going back to the marketplace and this viz performance flow visual. It's pretty decent. So you can add in your hierarchy, and it's the same way when you click a visual, you just dragged in the hierarchy and it's all set. But it will show, you can click people, kind of explore the org. If you need to do that, you can add a measure. And this visual, these are going to be high level overviews of these visuals, but you have a full grasp of setting up the whole row level security structure, how to unflatten and use those hierarchies. But now if you want to start visualizing it, you can get this visual and dive into it. Another one is the hierarchy tree, but I didn't really like this one too much. What you can do instead is, if you want, you can use a decomposition tree. And the way that these work is you simplistically, like, let's delete this sucker and say, let's go to add a decomposition tree. And maybe you want to analyze the hierarchy that way. Then we can say, okay, for the CALCs, let's do the sales hierarchy amount, but we want to analyze it by the hierarchy we've created. So we can explain it by that way. As we click plus into this hierarchy, we can go to level 1, well, it's going to show the president. Then you go level 2, and it breaks out the directs. You can see, okay, this person had the most of whatever, and you can kind of keep drilling through it that way. Again, you can click low value, high value. I have another video that shows how to use decomposition trees, but it's a cool way to explore the organization. So in that 45 minutes, we went from having a parent-child hierarchy, flattening it, creating a hierarchy, showing measures to remove blank values, talked about slicers, row-level security, implemented it, looked at a few visuals, including the decomposition tree, and now you should have everything you need to know to how to totally unlock and use a parent-child hierarchy in Power BI. Again, hit subscribe, hit like. Thank you for watching this. Any questions or comments, leave them. I read them all, and you'll have a good one. Bye.